it's beyond their situations. And it's not only the women and little girls, it's the families, the mothers particularly, when it comes to mental health.
No one can act with impunity.
These are crimes that are beyond the pale.
We are talking about human beings. We're not talking about numbers.
We need a court. That's as simple as that.
This is Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg. This episode was produced in partnership with justiceinfo.net.
All rise.
Thanks for tuning in to Asymmetrical Haircuts. To help us keep doing this show, please look at our supporters page on the website where you can find our Patreon and our newsletter.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Janet.
So we've been wanting to tackle Sudan for a while. Not surprising since everything is kicking off there. On the 15th of April, as we're putting this together at the end of March, the current conflict is approaching its second anniversary. We'll get back to that. Meanwhile, one thing that we do watch is that every 6 months, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court heads off to New York and goes to the United Nations Security Council and talks about Darfur. And why does he do it? Well, I'm sure Steph will explain. This conflict was referred to the ICC way back in 2005. And as we will hear, he talks to the ambassadors. How is it going, Steph, this investigation?
Well, there are outstanding arrest warrants against Sudanese officials, including one accusing former President Omar al-Bashir of genocide. And the ICC has just concluded its first Darfur trial of the alleged Janjaweed militia leader known as Ali Kushaib, and we're waiting for a verdict. The Reuters blurb on the conflict is that Darfur's conflict first erupted when mostly non-Arab rebels took up arms against Sudan's government, accusing it of marginalizing the remote Western Territory. Sudan's then government mobilized mostly Arab militias known as the Janjaweed to crush the revolt, unleashing a wave of violence that the US and human rights groups have said amounted to genocide.
Before we get to what's going on now, just a reminder of what Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the ICC, actually told the Security Council ambassadors back in January. Here's a short clip.
This is not, I want to make clear, a general assessment. It's not an assessment gleaned from unverified reports. It's a hard-edged analysis that my office has reached based upon evidence and information collected and reviewed. And we are particularly concerned about the stream of allegations for the targeting of women and girls, the allegations of gender crimes identified through our investigations. And these crimes are a priority of my office.
So what's he talking about, Steph?
Well, what has happened in Sudan is that the conflict has flared up again. Since April 2023, there is now fighting between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces. That has escalated very much. We are now in a week where at the beginning of the week, they announced that the Sudanese army has driven the rebels out of Khartoum. And we have lots of pictures of the government soldiers in the presidential palace in Khartoum. And the RSF is withdrawing from regions. Now, it's important to note that the ICC investigation, the jurisdiction given by the UN Security Council, just deals with crimes in Darfur, but the conflict there has also escalated. So they're not looking so much at Khartoum crimes, but Darfur crimes.
And what he's talking about then is what has happened in Darfur. What do we know about what happened in Darfur?
More generally, we know that the fighting in Sudan has killed more than 10,000 people and displaced more than 6 million. And in June last year, there were allegations that surfaced of widespread sexual assault by members of the Rapid Support Forces, which is an Arab-dominated paramilitary group which kind of grew from the former Janjaweed militias. The reports of the assaults that emerged in June took place during weeks of attacks in El Geneina, which is the capital of Sudan's West Darfur region.
And we've got details of this partly from journalists, and as we're going to hear from war crimes investigators of what they are describing as common patterns. Nearly all of the people who have given details of these alleged assaults say they were raped by multiple men, that they were targeting specific ethnic groups, and maybe some people were even singled out because of their human rights work.
My colleagues at Reuters have been hard at work interviewing survivors and getting firsthand news of what's been happening. We will link to these reports in the show notes. To summarize some of the details, it's a lot of what Janet has just said, that we have people telling my colleagues that they were taken away with multiple women, kept in a tent or a hut for several days and raped over and over again by men in RSF uniform.
So let's try and place that in a bit of context and talk through both what has been happening and what it is that Sudanese women themselves want to see happen in the form of accountability. We have invited Hala Al-Karib to join us. Hello, Hala.
Hello, how are you? Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hala is from Sudan, and she's an activist against sexual violence in war. She's the regional director of the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa. Hala, can you explain a bit what is going on with women and girls in Sudan now? Are they bearing the brunt of the attacks that we're hearing about?
This war is mostly about violating women and girls. And, the gender aspects is very central in this conflict that's currently happening in Sudan. Women bodies are not only used as war strategy, but more, women bodies are used as war tool. And this has been happening, since the first day of the war. But not only that, Sudan has a history of using women bodies as a war strategy for the past over 20, 30 years. And unfortunately, the issues of matters of accountability, holding perpetrators accountable, addressing and challenging the violations that are committed against women would never been addressed as part of Sudan political processes. So Sudan political elites were often allowed to get away with the violations that are committed on women, and it became almost normalized that women should pay the price of conflict, and when it's peace, when it's conflict negotiations around peace, then, the whole conversations about women and what they have endured, it completely disappeared.
We'll pick up on the role that women have played and what role you think they should play. And I'm really sorry to harp on the horrific nature of the attacks, but I'm wondering, this kind of general description that women are used as kind of weapons of war, is there something specific that is going on against women at the moment? I mean, is it particular women who are taken, or is it a particular way of attacking them?
I think it's important to speak about the patterns of violations because it's quite systemic and very intentional. So women has been raped and gang raped systematically since the beginning of the war. But I have to acknowledge that also for the past 20 years, women in Darfur and in South Kordofan has equally been enduring sexual violence in a systematic way. At this point in time, with the expansion of the conflict into new locations, particularly Central Sudan and the capital Khartoum, the same patterns of sexual violence that has been happening to women at the peripheries, it happened to women in the capital cities and in other Central Sudanese cities and villages. So sexual violence is quite prevalent, enforced disappearances and abductions of women and commodifications of women. Sexual slavery, is quite prevalent across the country. 90% of the cases that we have documented are gang rape cases. Almost 25% of our documentations of conflict-related sexual violence are children, are girls below the age of 18. And it did not exclude any women. So women of all ages, we have documented cases of women between the age of 6 years, of children between the age of 6 years old, all the way to women who are above 75 years old, who has been sexually assaulted. Majority of the women who remain in conflicts area, they contracted sexual transmitted diseases. There is no access to sexual and reproductive health services. Sudan is receiving minimal, below the minimal support when it comes to protections of women, protections of victims of sexual violence, and access to services. The mental health situation is catastrophic. It's disaster. And as the situation unfolding, when the RSF is exiting certain areas, then we get extremely overwhelmed because, for example, if we manage to document 20 or 25 cases in a specific area, I'm going to speak about the Jazeera, for example, then when the RSF exit the territory, we were overwhelmed with hundreds of new cases, with hundreds of women who were forced pregnancy and women who were, having raped children, and we're speaking about a country that the social services structure is completely collapsed, so it's beyond dire situations. And, also, as I said, it's not only the women and little girls, it's the families, the mothers particularly, when it comes to mental health. Just over a week ago, we were shocked. We found this a woman lawyer who is living in a village, in a small village in Al Jazeera, in Al Managil, and we were not able to access that area before. We were just able to access it now. And she told us, that she, since the RSF has entered Al Jazeera in December 2023, she documented 295 cases of sexual violence, women who were coming to the hospital because her home next to the hospital, So she said she dedicated her time to try to document the cases of women who are coming to the hospitals because they were sexually assaulted. And she said she managed to establish good relations with the hospital staff. And in this work we're doing also, you meet amazing people. And then eventually, because the numbers kept, the women and their families kept coming and they have nowhere to go because she lives next to the hospital. So she dedicated part of her home to those families to stay. And she said most of the women, if not all of them, they come with their mothers. And they come, and we're talking about, those are women from farming communities. It's even difficult for them to comprehend the concept of being raped and gang raped, and the burden of shame is left to the women to deal with. And so there is no support. So the mothers, the aunts, they come with the victim to the hospital. And she said she dedicated part of her home to them. So after they go through the treatment, they can spend time. And she said the most painful part for her, they just wanted to believe that they come to the hospital, they got the treatments, and some of them, they go through, other complicated procedures as well. They think that they were fixed, but she can tell that mentally and psychologically, the victims and their family members are extremely traumatized. And this woman, when we asked her, can you just scan your documentation and share it with us? Because we have been for a whole year and a half, we documented 250. And she said, I don't have a phone. She was talking to him, just a small, she doesn't have a phone, but she has been doing this great work. But that speaks also to the scale of the disaster, and what communities are confronted with.
We're going to go back to the consequences for the women, but I wanted to ask before, the examples you've mentioned so far are all about RSF forces. Is this a typical RSF thing, or is this also happening with the other forces involved in the fighting?
I would say more than 92% of the cases that we have documented are committed by the Rapid Support Forces. And this does not come as a surprise for us. We have documented a few cases by Sudan Armed Forces and also other cases by other armed groups. There are 4 joint armed groups, for example, the SPLM North. Also, we have documented cases. And this is happening basically because the Rapid Support Forces, previously known as the Janjaweed, they have been acting as the ruthless arm of Sudan Armed Forces for over 20 years. These techniques and strategies of utilizing sexual violence as a tool of repressions and as a tool to force, to humiliate communities, but also as a tool of forced evictions and as a tool of land grabbing and as a tool of looting. We have witnessed it firsthand in Darfur. This is what has happened across Darfur villages, and now it extended to the overall Sudan. This is how productive communities in Darfur has transferred from being independent and everything into communities of IDPs that's 100% reliant on it, because sexual violence was used as a tool to strip communities of everything, including the dignity. And this is a strategy that the RSF have utilized. And we have documented cases of sexual violence committed by the RSF since April 15 in Khartoum. Since April 15, the RSF started entering homes and raping women. And the thing is, when you are not held accountable, when you are, despite all the atrocities you commit, you still acknowledged by the international community and acknowledged by the political elites of Sudan, then you don't think that this is something that you will ever be held accountable for. And this is why, they don't accept, to take responsibility of this, and they call it, this is just random acts. It's not random acts. When you go door to door, when you separate men from women, and when you sexually assault women, and we strongly believe that men has been equally sexually assaulted. But this is a very conservative society, and it's going to take generations for men to speak up. We have documented a few cases of sexual violence against men, but we don't have the capacity or the resources to do that. If we encounter a case, we are very open to listen. We have encountered a case of a father and his 3 daughters. They were sexually assaulted by RSF soldiers. But we strongly believe that the number of cases of sexual violence against men is way more, than what we have encountered.
You spoke a little about the stigma that people are feeling. I'm wondering, I imagine also for men as well then, what kinds of consequences are you seeing as a result of this?
I think, at this point in time, our society is completely broken. And it's not about military winning, or it's about the human beings are being exposed to extreme brutalities. I think it's the consequences, if we continue trying to conceal the fact that, we have went through this, and this has happened to us collectively as society. that if I'm not raped, I know people who are close to me that were raped, and so on. So if we are not going to acknowledge this, and it becomes part of the formal narrative, and speak about it and centralize it when we are speaking about addressing the consequences and the process towards any conflict resolutions, and taking responsibility, even those of us who are speaking about it. This is when I speak about it, this is about me taking responsibility as a Sudanese woman of what happened, to other women. But unfortunately, if we continue to conceal it and continue to brush it away and pretend that it did not happen, or that's, it shouldn't, it would never have happened the way, you talked about, or, then we will never have peace. We will never have peace. And this is, we have seen in Sudan for decades.
When we speak about the stigma and the societal stigma, I believe there's also been reports of women committing suicide after this trauma, which is very far from the Sudanese culture. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. There is many women who have chosen to lose their lives and to live with the pain of what they have endured. Especially the cases of suicide has came out very strongly in Al Jazeera, a very conservative society, a very non-militarized society that was shocked by the level of violence that they have experienced by the RSF, particularly the communities in Eastern Jazeera, where we in SIHA documented about 10 cases of suicide. But we believe that the cases of suicide are much more than this. We have also documented cases of women losing their lives because there was no access to medical service as a result of, constant bleedings. We have documented cases of women that their families took them out of the hospitals because they were, they couldn't bear the idea that everyone in the hospital in northern Sudan, and that was one of the most painful things, that the case of the young woman who was taken out of the hospital by her family, and we couldn't reach her out, and she bled to death. But for them, the shame that the doctors, they come around her bed and they look and they try to identify the source of the bleeding and why she continued to bleed. And so everyone in the hospital knows. So there is no facilities. There is no facilities to respect, and preserve the dignity and the well-being of the victims of sexual violence. And there is no investments on that. And we had enough time to do that. And those are not expensive facilities. It's just private sections within the health facility. It can be a room where the victim can get in and receive, the support she needs.
A consequence of this ongoing conflict is also that a lot of people are internally displaced and they end up in IDP camps and camps in neighboring countries. When I spoke to someone on the ICC team looking into crimes or alleged crimes happening in Sudan, they told me that they were very much also looking at possible attacks happening in IDP camps. So are women safe in those camps if they flee the conflict?
No, they are not. They are not. The impunity and the fact that sexual violence has been quite prevalent in Sudan even before this war, it makes women's safety, even inside IDP camps, something that's not possible unless there is very, very clear kind of accountability processes that started to take place. Even when we speak about, the sanctions, for example, against certain individuals, sexual violence was never centralized as a crime. The narrative is very generic. So it's as if everyone is avoiding that. The issue of sexual violence in Sudan and the lack of safety of women, it's something that has to be seriously integrated into all political and policy agenda. But yes, no, women are not safe. Women are raped by their own community members. They are raped by camp leaders. They are raped by local police. So the culture of rape is quite prevalent, and there is no protection.
Would you also say that this culture of rape leads to an analysis that this could be a form of genocide? I mean, are women actually being targeted for their ethnicity? Maybe just a little bit of context on that. There's a genocide claim as we're recording at the International Court of Justice, where Sudan has brought the United Arab Emirates. And the allegation is that they've been violating their obligations under the Genocide Convention because of the support, the arms that they've given to the RSF. But I think both Steph and I have written about that this is unlikely to go very far because the United Arab Emirates is likely to say, oh, you don't have jurisdiction. But in the broader context, are you seeing what you might consider genocidal patterns?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is genocidal pattern. I have no doubt about it. Women were targeted for who they are, at this point as we are speaking in Darfur. That happened for the past 20 years. It's extensively happening now in North Darfur. It's happening in Central Darfur, in Zalinji, and it happened, as we all know, in El Junaina, in West Darfur. And women are targeted for who they are, and they were told that they were targeted for who they are. In Umdurman, we have documented cases of women that they were told that this is why we are targeting you, is because you are from Nuba Mountains, or because you are or because. So absolutely, that is happening. At the same time, the RSF attack on Al Jazeera, for example, so it took different, I would say, patterns. So initially, poor women who were originally from Darfur, women who were forced to be on the streets as street vendors and tea sellers, they have been exposed to gang rape and sexual violence, sometimes by the side of the road. And then as the RSF stayed longer, they started to target, for example, women who are lighter skinned. And they would say it, that we know that you have light-skinned girls here, something like that. So it depends on the region, but 100% in Darfur, as we are speaking, women are targeted for who they are. They are targeted by sexual violence, but they were also targeted by acts of slavery. And nobody speaks about slavery. But women were forced to engage in servitude activities for the RSF soldiers for very long time. And that's happening systematically in Darfur for very long time. And it happened as well in many parts of Central Sudan, where women were held and they were forced to do services. And we have documented a case of a group of women who are elder women in west of Umdurman, and it's an RSF-controlled area. And they were, every time they were gathered and forced to serve the RSF soldiers, and they will tell them that you are too ugly, so that don't worry, we will not rape you. But after they do all the service, they clean, they wash everything, they carry the heavy machineries. And we are speaking about women who are above 65 and 70. They were forced to dance for the RSF soldiers, and the RSF will fire bullets during they were dancing, and they would laugh at them. So this is quite common, the issue of holding women for very long period of time to provide services. But in Darfur, it's quite extensive.
And you've been telling us how you are documenting all these crimes. There is some accountability initiatives for Sudan. I mean, it was referred to the ICC, but you've also expressed your frustration with the types of crimes that the ICC apparently is looking at or what it's saying. What are you hoping for in terms of accountability? What should happen?
I think that's a long process. It doesn't mean we're going to stop talking about it. We have to continue to talking about it. It's our obligation to keep talking about it and to insist on it. And you would be surprised that some of the victims or survivors, they also hold on to the whole narrative about justice. And they will tell you that we want, in Arabic, this is how they say it. In different parts of Sudan, they would say dairin haggana. Haggana is like we want, like what was taken from us. We want what was ours. And I think that's really important, that sense of demanding justice, because without that, we cannot exert pressure on Sudanese policy actors and political actors and those who are manipulating and maneuvering these situations to have some sort of functioning system that would acknowledge and enable a form of justice to take place. So that's really very important. We're also very much emphasizing the concept of comprehensive justice, that women, victims of sexual violence, what happened to them has to be acknowledged. It has to be clearly talked about and not concealed. And it has to be, there should be measures and precautions that this shouldn't happen again. And we should, those of them who has the courage and they feel they are in a position to speak, we allow them to speak safely. And then we talk about, reparations, talk about resilience and their rights to access health and mental health services. Those are all elements of comprehensive justice, because part of the lack of justice is the lack of acknowledgement by depriving the victims of services. And this is the most painful part, because you force people to resort to violence. You force communities to hold grievances and take matters to their own hands. And unfortunately, this is what's happening now. There is no support that's coming for Sudan.
Hala, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We always ask a series of questions at the end. And the first one is there anything else that you didn't get the chance to say to us that you would like to say to start with before we finished? I know there's so much. We've only scratched the surface, but what's the one thing that you think that you didn't get the chance to say?
You enabled me to speak very openly, and thank you for the space. But I think, it's very important for everyone to contribute, to acknowledge what happened to Sudanese women, and not to make all of us feel lonely, and not to contribute to the burden of shame that we are currently struggling with. It's such a lonely path at the moment. Your support is very important.
And another question we always ask before, because we are a podcast also with legal geeks, is that we ask people if they have a favorite court case or some case that inspired you or possibly inspires you to do what you do, or where you could see what the impact of survivors speaking about what happened to them mattered.
I think the Bosnia case, absolutely. This is what inspired me, and this is why, in addition, of course, to my experience and everything, but it really gives me hope that, at some point, despite the differences, circumstances, and times, but from there we have learned that nobody should be silent about conflict-related sexual violence.
And we always ask at the end, I don't know whether you have any time to go away from your main work. Do you have any recommendations for reading or listening or watching, maybe in the field or maybe something that's further away, something that you use to relax?
I mean, I go for walks. It helps.
Me too. I'm lucky enough still to have a dog, so I'm lucky enough to be forced out 4 times a day. So that's important.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. Hala, thank you. We would love to have you back again to tell us. Let's hope that things change in a positive direction and that you can tell us what's positively happening at some point. That's what we can all hope for.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thanks a lot.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg. This episode was created in partnership with justiceinfo.net, an independent site covering justice efforts for mass violence, and with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.